My name is Victoria Chen, and at 72 years old, I finally understand that silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. On New Year's Eve, I stood in the kitchen of the brownstone my late husband Marcus and I had restored together over 43 years of marriage, stirring a pot of soup I had no appetite for. The radio played old jazz standards Marcus used to hum while cooking, and I couldn't bring myself to turn it off, because those melodies were all I had left of the man who'd made our little corner of Brooklyn feel like the entire world. His favorite armchair sat empty by the bay window, still holding the impression of his body even though he'd been gone 11 months. I hadn't moved it, hadn't even sat in it myself. Some spaces belong to the dead, and we shouldn't disturb them. The evening light filtered through the lace curtains, casting shadows that danced across the hardwood floors we'd refinished together one summer when our son Christopher was just learning to walk. Before I could think about dinner, I walked to the windowsill where Marcus's orchids bloomed in their ceramic pots. He'd planted them 4 years ago, told me they needed consistency and patience to thrive. Now I realize he was teaching me something I wouldn't understand until he was gone. Tending to these flowers had become my meditation, my daily conversation with the man I'd loved for 43 years. Every morning and every evening, I watered them, checked their leaves, rotated them toward the light. It was the one ritual that made me feel like Marcus was still here, still guiding my hands. After caring for the orchids, I sat down at our antique writing desk with my laptop to handle the monthly bills. It was a routine Marcus and I had shared throughout our marriage. He managed the investments, I managed the day-to-day expenses. Now I handled everything alone, navigating a financial world I'd never paid much attention to, because I'd always trusted him to handle the big picture. I logged into our savings account, the one we'd built together through decades of careful choices and deliberate sacrifices. The balance should have shown approximately $73,000. Instead, the number staring back at me was $18,000 and change. My hands went numb. I scrolled through the transaction history, my heart hammering against my ribs with each line I read. $55,000, gone. Electronic transfers spread across the past 3 weeks, amounts varying from $4,000 to $9,000 at a time. I hadn't authorized these transfers. I didn't even know they were happening. My fingers trembled as I dialed the bank's customer service line. The representative was polite, but frustratingly robotic at first, reading from her script about security protocols and verification procedures. When I pressed her, when I told her my husband had just died, and someone was stealing the life we'd built together, her voice softened. She confirmed what I already feared in my gut. The account had been accessed using Marcus's old login credentials. Someone had used my dead husband's information to rob me. The IP address traced back to a location I recognized immediately: my son Christopher's apartment in Park Slope. I sat there for what felt like hours after hanging up, the laptop screen glowing in the dimming kitchen light. My eyes drifted to the mantel, where Marcus's photograph smiled at me from its brass frame. He looked the way he always did, calm, knowing, like he could see around corners I couldn't. Then I remembered something I'd tried not to think about. In his final months, Marcus made phone calls he never explained. He would talk softly in the bedroom, and the moment I walked in, he'd hang up and change the subject. I never pushed him on it. I trusted him completely, and I assumed he'd tell me when he was ready. He never did. Now I sat in our empty kitchen on New Year's Eve, robbed by my own family, and I wondered what secrets my husband had carried to his grave. The soup grew cold on the stove. I turned off the burner, grabbed my coat, and walked out into the falling snow. The drive to Christopher's apartment took 30 minutes through traffic that seemed designed to test my patience. My mind raced with numbers that didn't add up and questions I didn't want to ask. When I arrived, I didn't park in front of his building. I pulled across the street and sat in the darkness, watching the warm light spill from his third-floor windows. Through the glass, I could see them. Christopher, his wife Vanessa, and a table set for a feast. They were laughing. My son threw his head back at something his wife said, and she touched his shoulder with an easy affection I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Their Christmas tree still glittered in the corner, lights twinkling like nothing was wrong. The turkey sat golden and perfect at the center of their dining table. They hadn't invited me to their celebration. They hadn't even called to check on me during the holidays, the first holidays without Marcus. And somewhere in that apartment, on a computer connected to their wireless network, someone had used my husband's name to steal everything we'd saved. I stepped out of the car, snow settling on my shoulders, like a warning I was too angry to heed. The doorbell echoed through the building like an accusation. I stood in the hallway with snow melting on my coat, watching shapes move behind the frosted glass door. Vanessa opened it, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, then calculation, then a smile so practiced it could have been painted on. So practiced it could have been painted on. What a surprise. We weren't expecting you tonight. Clearly, I replied. I stepped inside without waiting to be invited. The apartment smelled of roasted meat and expensive candles, the kind that cost $40 each. The dining table was set with Marcus's mother's china, pieces Vanessa had asked to borrow 3 years ago and never returned. Christopher rose from his seat, napkins still tucked into his collar, his face cycling through emotions too fast for me to read. End of pause. Strong. Mom, what are you doing here? I didn't answer him. I walked straight to their dining table, pulled out a chair, and sat down across from Vanessa. She remained standing, her smile frozen in place, like a mask she'd forgotten to remove. $55,000, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Gone from our savings account over the past 3 weeks. Electronic transfers, every single one traced to this address. The room went silent. Christopher's fork clattered against his plate. Vanessa's smile didn't waver, but something behind her eyes shifted. A door closing, a lock clicking into place. Victoria? She said my name the way you might address a child who'd wandered into an adult conversation. She sat down slowly, folding her hands on the table, like a teacher preparing to explain something very simple to a very slow student. You're getting confused, she continued. It happens at your age. Memory lapses, forgotten authorizations. You probably set up those transfers yourself and don't remember. I did not authorize anything. Are you sure? She tilted her head, her voice soft with false concern. Because Christopher mentioned you've been having trouble lately. Forgetting appointments, losing your keys. It's nothing to be ashamed of. My grandmother went through the same thing before she needed help. I am not your grandmother, I cut her off, my hands flat on the table. And I am not confused. The bank confirmed it. Someone used Marcus's login credentials. Someone in this apartment. I turned to Christopher. My son sat rigid in his chair, staring at his plate like it contained answers to questions he was afraid to ask. His hands trembled when he reached for his wine glass, and he drank deeply before setting it down with a thud. Christopher, look at me. He wouldn't. His eyes stayed fixed on the tablecloth, on the candles, on anything but my face. Mom, just drop it. His voice cracked on the last word. Vanessa handles our finances. She knows what she's doing. If she says you authorized it, then maybe you did and forgot. You believe that? He didn't answer. But Vanessa shot him a look I'll never forget. Sharp, warning, the kind of glance that carries the weight of secrets and threats. Christopher's shoulders curled inward like a beaten dog retreating from a raised hand. Whatever passed between them in that moment, I didn't understand it fully. But I knew it wasn't the look a wife gives a husband. It was the look a handler gives an animal that has stepped out of line. Vanessa's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen, and her entire demeanor changed. The color drained from her face. She stood abruptly, already lifting the phone to her ear. "Excuse me, I have to take this." She walked into the kitchen, but the apartment was small and the walls were thin. I heard her whisper, sharp and urgent, "Mom, I told you next week. I'll have it next week. Just wait." A pause. "I'm handling it. I said I'm handling it." When she returned, her smile was back, brighter than before, brittle as cheap glass. She smoothed her blouse and sat down as if nothing had happened. "Where were we? Oh yes, Victoria's memory problems." "There's nothing wrong with my memory." I stood now, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I want answers. I want to know where my money went and why you thought you could steal from me using my dead husband's name." "Steal?" Vanessa's voice rose an octave. She stood to meet me and the mask finally cracked. "You come into my home on New Year's Eve and accuse me of stealing? After everything I've done for this family? I'm the one who takes care of Christopher. I'm the one who manages everything, while you sit alone in that empty house, talking to a dead man's flowers." "Vanessa," Christopher started. "No," she pointed at me, her finger trembling with rage. "You don't get to come here and throw accusations around. You're a bitter old woman who can't accept that her son has his own life now. Maybe Marcus kept secrets from you because he knew you couldn't handle the truth." The mention of Marcus's name in that tone broke something inside me. I stepped toward Vanessa, words rising in my throat that I would never get the chance to speak, because in that moment, hands shoved me hard from behind. I stumbled backward, my hip catching the corner of the dining table, my arms flailing for balance I couldn't find. The world tilted. I heard Marcus's mother's china crash to the floor, crystal glasses shattering into 1,000 pieces. Then my head struck something solid, and the room exploded into white light and ringing silence. When my vision cleared, I was on the ground. Blood trickled warm and wet down my temple, pooling near my eye. The ceiling light above me fractured into streaks that made no sense, and standing over me, frozen in place, pale as death, was my son Christopher. His hands were still raised, his wedding ring catching the light. He had pushed me, not Vanessa. My own son had put his hands on me and shoved me to the ground. The last thing I saw before darkness pulled at the edges of my consciousness was his face, not angry, not triumphant, but terrified, like a man who had just realized he'd crossed a line he could never uncross. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. The ceiling spun above me in slow, sickening circles, the light fixture bleeding into streaks that made my head throb. I could hear voices, but they came from somewhere far away, muffled like sounds through deep water. Someone was screaming. Someone else was saying words I couldn't piece together. The blood from my temple had reached my ear now, warm and thick, and the hardwood floor beneath my back was cold enough to seep through my clothes and settle into my bones. "Call an ambulance." Vanessa's voice cut through the fog. "She's bleeding. We have to call someone." "No." Christopher's voice, sharp and final. "She's fine. She just fell. She's fine." I tried to speak, to tell them I was not fine, that nothing about this moment was fine, but my tongue felt thick and useless in my mouth. My eyes focused slowly, painfully, on the ceiling medallion above me. Marcus had admired that medallion when we helped Christopher and Vanessa move in 4 years ago. He said it reminded him of the one in our first apartment, back when we had nothing but each other and a love stubborn enough to build a life on. My mind began to clear in fragments. The argument, Vanessa's pointed finger, the shove from behind. I replayed the moment over and over, trying to make sense of what my body already knew. I had been facing Vanessa when the hand struck my back. The force came from behind me, from where Christopher had been sitting. And in that frozen instant before I fell, I had seen something, a flash of gold on the left hand that pushed me. a wedding ring on the left hand. The realization hit me harder than the fall. My own son had put his hands on my back and shoved me to the ground, not in a moment of confusion, not by accident. He had chosen to do it. He had chosen her over me. I rolled onto my side and pushed myself up slowly, every joint protesting, every muscle screaming. The room tilted and I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. Blood dripped onto the white tablecloth, spreading in small crimson blooms across the fabric. No one moved to help me. I looked at Christopher. My son stood exactly where he had been when I fell, his arms now hanging limp at his sides, his face the color of old paper. I searched his eyes for something, remorse, guilt, an explanation, anything that might help me understand how he had arrived at this moment. He wouldn't meet my gaze. His eyes darted to the floor, to the wall, to Vanessa, anywhere but my face. "Christopher," my voice came out as a rasp. "Look at me." He did not. Vanessa stepped between us, smoothing her blouse as if the last 5 minutes had been nothing more than an awkward interruption to her dinner party. Our composure had returned completely, her face arranged into an expression of patient concern that fooled no one. "I think it's best if you leave, Victoria." Her voice was calm, measured, the tone of someone managing a difficult situation with admirable restraint. "You're clearly not well. You've had some kind of episode. We can discuss all of this after the holidays when everyone has calmed down." "An episode?" I repeated the word like it was spoken in a foreign language. "Your husband just assaulted me." "You fell." She said it simply, as if stating an obvious fact. "You got upset, and you fell. It happens to people your age. No one is blaming you." I stood there, blood drying on my face, and understood with perfect clarity that there would be no justice in this room. Not tonight, perhaps not ever. Vanessa had already written the story she would tell, and Christopher had already chosen which version of events he would remember. At midnight on New Year's Eve, my daughter-in-law walked me to the front door. She retrieved my coat from the closet and handed it to me the way you might hand a receipt to a delivery driver, efficiently, impersonally, eager to complete the transaction. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said quietly. "Go home, get some rest. We'll talk when you're thinking more clearly." The door opened. Cold air rushed in, carrying snowflakes that melted against my bloody face. I stepped out into the hallway, and before I could turn around, the door closed behind me with a soft, decisive click. I stood alone in the falling snow, 72 years old, bleeding from a wound my own son had given me, with nowhere to go on the coldest night of the year. Behind me, the windows glowed golden and warm. Through the glass, I heard Vanessa say something I couldn't make out, and then I heard her laugh. It was a bright, careless sound, the laugh of someone who had just won a game she'd been playing for a very long time. I wiped the blood from my eye and walked toward my car. The snow was falling harder now, covering my footprints as quickly as I made them, erasing the evidence that I had ever been there at all. The Riverside Inn sat on the outskirts of Brooklyn, where the neighborhood turned industrial, and respectable people rarely had reason to stop. I pulled into the parking lot just after midnight, my headlights sweeping across cracked pavement and a flickering neon sign that advertised vacancies in letters missing half their glow. The night clerk barely looked at me when I paid cash for 4 nights. He slid a key across the counter and went back to his phone without asking about the blood dried dark against my temple. The room smelled of mildew and old cigarette smoke, the kind of smell that seeps into walls and never leaves. The carpet was stained in patterns I chose not to examine. The heater rattled and coughed beneath the window like a dying animal struggling for breath. I locked the door behind me, drew the curtains against the parking lot lights, and stood for a long moment in the darkness before I could make myself move again. In the bathroom, I confronted my reflection under the buzzing fluorescent light. The gash on my temple was worse than I'd allowed myself to believe. nearly 3 inches long, the edges ragged and angry, still seeping blood when I pressed too hard. It needed stitches. A doctor would have cleaned it properly, checked for concussion, sent me home with antibiotics and instructions for care. But doctors cost money, and hospitals asked questions, and I no longer had $55,000 to spare for either. I cleaned the wound as best I could with motel soap and paper towels that felt like sandpaper against my skin. I fashioned a bandage from the cleanest washcloth I could find and taped it in place with supplies from the first aid kit Marcus had insisted I keep in my glove compartment. Even now, he was still taking care of me. For 3 days, I didn't leave that room. I sat in the chair by the window and watched cars pass on the highway, their headlights cutting through the gray January fog like promises no one intended to keep. I thought about Marcus, about the 43 years we spent building a life together, the sacrifices we made, the arguments we survived, the quiet moments that meant more than either of us ever said aloud. He would have known what to do. He always knew. He would have seen through Vanessa the moment that woman walked into our lives, would have recognized the calculation behind those pretty smiles and practiced gestures. Marcus had a gift for seeing people clearly, for understanding what they wanted before they knew themselves. I should have listened to him more. I should have asked more questions. I should have paid attention to the signs I was too comfortable to notice. On the third evening, I pulled out my wallet to count what little cash remained. Behind the bills, tucked into the sleeve where I kept my insurance cards, I found Marcus's last driver's license photo. I'd put it there after he died, unable to leave it in a drawer where I would never see it. His face smiled up at me, patient and knowing, his eyes holding secrets I was only now beginning to suspect. Behind the photo, I found something I had forgotten entirely. A folded slip of paper, soft with age, covered in Marcus's careful handwriting. A phone number, with no name, underlined 3 times in blue ink. Beneath it, a single word, emergency. I stared at that word until my eyes burned. Emergency. He had written it deliberately, underlined the number as if willing me to understand its importance. Behind the photo, I found something I had forgotten entirely. A folded slip of paper, soft with age, covered in Marcus's careful handwriting. A phone number with no name, underlined 3 times in blue ink. The private phone calls he made behind closed doors. Conversations he ended the moment I entered the room. The afternoon he disappeared for 4 hours and returned looking tired, but strangely peaceful, refusing to explain where he'd been. And the night, just days before the end, when he took my hand in both of his and held it with a strength that surprised me. "If anything ever happens," he had whispered, his eyes fixed on mine with an intensity I didn't understand. "Open the bottom drawer of my desk. Promise me you'll wait until you need it. You'll know when." I had promised. I had held his hand and promised without knowing what I was agreeing to, because he was dying, and I would have promised him anything to ease the fear I saw lurking behind his calm. Now I sat in a motel room that smelled of other people's failures, holding a phone number my dead husband had hidden in my wallet, and I began to understand that Marcus had known something was coming. He had prepared for a future he would not live to see. I reached for my phone and began to dial the number, my finger hovering over the final digit. Then the phone buzzed in my hand, and Christopher's name appeared on the screen. After 3 days of silence, after leaving his mother bleeding on New Year's Eve, my son was finally calling. My hand trembled as I stared at Christopher's name glowing on the screen. For a moment, I let myself believe. I let myself imagine that my son was calling to apologize, that the events of New Year's Eve had haunted him the way they haunted me. That somewhere beneath the fear and the weakness, there was still the boy I had raised, the boy who used to make me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day, the boy who cried when his goldfish died and insisted we hold a funeral in the backyard, the boy I loved more than my own life, even now, even after everything. I answered the call. "Christopher!" "Mom," his voice was flat, businesslike, carrying none of the weight I had hoped to hear. "I've been trying to reach you. You're not at the house." "No, I'm not." A pause. I waited for him to ask where I was, how I was, whether the wound on my head had stopped bleeding. I waited for the words that would tell me my son still existed somewhere inside the stranger he had become. "Listen," Christopher said, "the mortgage payment is due on the 5th. I checked the account, and the automatic transfer didn't go through. Did you set it up? We need that payment processed by Friday, or there's going to be a late fee." The hope in my chest collapsed like a building with its foundations pulled away. He hadn't called to apologize. He hadn't called to check on me. He had called about money. After leaving me bleeding on his floor, after 3 days of absolute silence, my son's first concern was whether I had remembered to pay his mortgage. "Christopher," I said quietly, "do you want to know if I survived that night?" Silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing, could hear the television murmuring in the background of his comfortable home. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the exhausted irritation of a man dealing with an inconvenience. "Don't be dramatic, Mom. You're fine. You walked out on your own 2 feet. Now, about the mortgage. I won't be paying it." The words came out before I fully decided to say them. 4 words, simple and clear, carrying the weight of everything I had lost and everything I now understood. "What?" Christopher's voice sharpened. "Mom, you can't just—" I hung up. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I set it on the nightstand. I expected to feel something: anger, satisfaction, grief. Instead, there was only a hollow clarity, the strange calm that comes when you finally stop pretending. For years, I had paid their mortgage, their car loans, their credit card bills when they fell behind. I had written checks and asked no questions, believing I was helping my son build a life. Now I understood I had only been funding my own replacement. The phone rang again. I almost didn't answer, expecting Christopher calling back to argue or threaten or manipulate. But the name on the screen was different: Patricia Lewis. Patricia had been Marcus's closest friend for over 40 years. They met in graduate school and stayed connected through marriages, children, moves across the country, and all the small disasters that make up a life. When Marcus got sick, Patricia visited every week without fail. When Marcus died, Patricia sat beside me at the funeral and held my hand without saying a word, because she understood that some grief is too large for language. I answered. "Victoria," her voice was worried, urgent in a way I had never heard from her. "I just heard from the Hendersons next door that you haven't been home in days. They saw your car gone New Year's night and it hasn't come back. Are you all right? Where are you?" "I'm fine, Patricia. I'm at a motel." "A motel? Victoria, what happened?" I considered lying, considered protecting Christopher the way I had always protected him. But I was tired of lies, tired of protection that only enabled worse behavior. I told her about New Year's Eve, about the missing money, the confrontation, the fall, about Christopher's hands on my back and the door closing behind me. Patricia was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. It was heavier now, burdened with something she had been carrying alone. "Victoria, listen to me. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you months ago. But Marcus made me promise to wait. He said you'd need to hear it when the time was right, and I think the time is right now." My grip tightened on the phone. "What is it?" "It's about Christopher, about something that happened 6 years ago. Marcus knew about it. He found out somehow. I don't know how, but he knew. And I think Vanessa knows too." Patricia paused, and when she continued, her voice dropped low. "That's how she controls him, Victoria. That's why he does whatever she says. She's been holding something over his head for years." The motel room seemed to shrink around me. The heater rattled, the highway hummed beyond the window, and Marcus's secret phone number burned in my pocket, like a promise I was only beginning to understand. "Patricia," I said slowly. What exactly did my son do? Patricia arrived at the Riverside Inn within the hour. I watched from the window as her sedan pulled into the parking lot, its headlights cutting through the evening fog. She emerged carrying a plastic bag from the pharmacy and a determination in her step that reminded me so strongly of Marcus, it made my chest ache. When I opened the door, she took one look at my face, and her expression shifted from concern to barely contained fury. She pushed past me into the room, set her bag on the bed, and pointed at the chair by the window. "Sit down," she said. "Let me see that wound." Patricia pulled supplies from her bag: proper bandages, antiseptic, butterfly closures, antibiotic ointment. She worked with the efficient hands of a woman who had raised 4 children and buried a husband, who had seen enough of life's cruelties to know how to clean up after them. "This should have had stitches," she muttered, dabbing antiseptic along the gash. I winced but didn't pull away. "You could have an infection. You could have a concussion. Victoria, you should be in a hospital. I'll heal." "You're as stubborn as he was." Patricia's voice softened. She pressed a butterfly closure into place with gentle fingers. "Marcus was my best friend for 40 years. I owe him this. I owe him more than I can ever repay." She finished dressing the wound and sat down on the edge of the bed across from me. The motel room felt smaller with 2 people in it, the weight of what she had come to tell me pressing against the thin walls. "I need to explain what I know," Patricia said. "About New Year's Eve, but also about what happened before. I stopped by Christopher's apartment that afternoon to drop off a card. Marcus and I always exchanged cards on New Year's Eve. It was our tradition, and I wanted to keep it alive by giving one to Christopher." She paused, her hands folding and unfolding in her lap. "Vanessa's car was in the driveway, but no one answered when I knocked. So I let myself in through the back entrance. Marcus and I used to do that all the time when he was alive. I didn't think anything of it. What did you hear?" I sat waiting. I could hear Vanessa in the bedroom, talking on the phone. Her voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Cold, businesslike, like she was discussing a transaction instead of a person. Patricia met my eyes. She said, "Tonight I'll handle the old woman. After New Year's, everything will be ours. She won't fight back, she's too weak." The words landed like stones in still water. I had suspected Vanessa's manipulation, had felt the edges of her contempt, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way I hadn't been prepared for. "There's more," Patricia continued. She laughed then. It was an ugly sound, Victoria. She said, "Christopher will do whatever I tell him. He doesn't have a choice." Then she hung up, and I slipped out before she knew I was there. "Why didn't you warn me? I tried to call you that evening, but you didn't answer. By the time I reached you, it was already too late." Patricia's face crumpled with guilt. "I should have done more. I should have driven to your house and told you in person, but I kept thinking maybe I misunderstood. Maybe there was an explanation. I was a coward, Victoria. I'm sorry." I reached out and took her hand. "You're here now. That's what matters." Patricia squeezed my fingers, then took a breath as if steeling herself for what came next. "There's something else. Something I've never told anyone. Not even Marcus, though I think he knew anyway." She looked toward the window, toward the highway lights bleeding through the fog. 6 years ago, I saw Christopher come home at 4 in the morning. I couldn't sleep that night. My insomnia was acting up, and I was sitting by my window when his car pulled into the street. He got out and just stood there in the dark for the longest time. When he finally walked to his building, I could see his face under the streetlight. He was white as a ghost, Victoria, shaking so badly he could barely get his keys in the lock. "Did you ask him about it?" I mentioned it to Marcus the next week. He got very quiet and changed the subject. Patricia turned back to face me. But I noticed something after that night. Vanessa was suddenly in charge of everything: the finances, the decisions, Christopher's schedule. He stopped disagreeing with her in public. Whatever happened that night, she's been holding it over him ever since. The pieces were beginning to form a picture I didn't yet fully understand. Christopher's weakness, Vanessa's control, the fear I had seen in my son's eyes when he stood over me on New Year's Eve. Something had broken him 6 years ago, and Vanessa had been exploiting that break ever since. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded slip of paper from Marcus's wallet, the phone number underlined 3 times, the single word beneath it, emergency. "Patricia," I said, holding it out to her. "Do you know who this is?" She took the paper and studied it. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by something that looked almost like relief. "That's Thomas Whitmore," she said quietly. "Marcus's lawyer. He went to see him several times in his last months. He made me promise never to tell you about him." Patricia handed the paper back, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that reminded me why she and Marcus had been friends for so long. "Unless you found that number yourself. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you." I drove home that night with Patricia's words echoing in my mind, and Marcus's secret phone number burning in my pocket. The brownstone where I had spent 43 years of my life sat dark against the winter sky, its windows reflecting nothing but the street lights and the bare branches of the oak tree Marcus had planted when Christopher was born. I hadn't been back since New Year's Eve. Walking through the front door felt like entering a tomb. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The dishes I'd been washing before driving to Christopher's apartment still sat in the drying rack. The holiday cards I'd received from old friends stood in a neat row on the mantel, unopened. Marcus's orchids waited by the window, their soil dry and cracked from days without water. I filled the watering can and tended to them before doing anything else. Some rituals matter more than others. The house felt like a museum now, every object preserved exactly as Marcus had arranged it during his final months. His reading glasses still sat on the end table beside his chair. His cardigan still hung over the back of the kitchen stool, where he liked to sit while I cooked dinner. The calendar on the refrigerator still showed December, the last month he had strength enough to change it. I hadn't been able to bring myself to move forward without him. I walked to the study at the back of the house, the room Marcus had claimed as his own when we first moved in. He called it his sanctuary, the place where he managed investments and wrote letters and made the phone calls that kept our lives organized. I'd respected that space during our marriage, knocking before entering, never opening drawers or reading papers that weren't meant for my eyes. Marcus was entitled to his privacy. I trusted him completely. The bottom drawer at his desk had always been locked. I noticed it years ago, but never asked about it. Every person needs a place to keep the parts of themselves they're not ready to share. I assumed it held old journals, perhaps letters from before we met, keepsakes from a past that belonged only to him. Now I knelt before the desk and examined the lock with different eyes. Patricia's revelation had changed everything. Marcus had kept secrets, yes, but not the kind I had imagined. He had been preparing for something. He had been preparing for this. I found a letter opener in the top drawer and worked it into the gap beside the lock. The wood was old and the mechanism was simple. After a few minutes of patient pressure, the lock gave way with a soft click that seemed to echo through the empty house. Inside the drawer, I found a thick folder stamped with the word confidential in red letters. A law firm's letterhead crowned the first page, Whitmore and Associates. Estate Planning and Trust Administration. I lifted the folder onto the desk and began to examine its contents with trembling hands. Trust documents, financial records, legal correspondence dated from Marcus's final months, some of it signed just weeks before he died. Page after page of careful preparation, meticulous planning, language I didn't fully understand but recognized as significant. Marcus had been building something in secret, instructing a framework I was only now beginning to see. At the bottom of the stack, I found an envelope with my name written in his elegant script. The handwriting was weaker than I remembered, the letters slightly uneven in a way that spoke of the effort it had cost him to write them. "For Victoria," it read, "only open when you know the truth." As I lifted the envelope, a photograph slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. I bent to retrieve it and found myself looking at an image I had never seen before. Marcus sat across a desk from the silver-haired man in a wood-paneled office, a stack of documents between them. He was signing something, his pen poised over the paper with the decisive grace I remembered from 1,000 household forms and birthday cards. He was smiling, but his eyes held a fierceness I recognized, the look he got when protecting something he loved. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in his handwriting, were 2 lines that made my throat tighten. "Thomas Whitmore, he will help you when I cannot." I set the photograph aside and opened the envelope with fingers that no longer felt like my own. The letter inside was 4 pages long, written on the pale cream stationery Marcus had always favored. I unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases against the desk, and began to read. The first line stopped my breath. "My dearest Victoria, if you're reading this, then I was right about her. I'm sorry I never told you. I was trying to protect you, but I was also preparing for war." The law offices of Whitmore and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a limestone building in downtown Brooklyn, the kind of building that had stood for 100 years and would stand for 100 more. I arrived the next morning with Marcus's letter in my purse and a list of questions I wasn't certain I wanted answered. The receptionist led me down a hallway lined with framed diplomas and photographs of handshakes. Accumulated evidence of decades spent navigating other people's secrets. Thomas Whitmore rose from behind his desk when I entered. He was exactly as the photograph had shown him, silver-haired, calm, with the quiet authority of someone who had kept serious confidences and never broken them. His office smelled of old books and leather, the kind of space where important decisions were made in measured voices. He extended his hand and gripped mine with a warmth that surprised me. "Mrs. Chen, I've been expecting you." His eyes searched my face with something like recognition. "Your husband spoke about you constantly during our meetings. He loved you more than you know." I sat in the chair across from his desk, the same chair Marcus had occupied in the photograph. The leather was worn smooth from years of clients seeking help they couldn't find elsewhere. Thomas settled into his own seat and folded his hands on the desk between us. "You found the drawer," he said. It wasn't a question. I found it and I read his letter. The first page. "I wanted to hear the rest from you." Thomas nodded slowly, as if this was the answer he had expected. He reached into a drawer and withdrew a folder thick with documents, setting it on the desk with the reverence of a man handling something precious. "9 months before Marcus passed," he began, "he came to my office unannounced. He was already sick by then, though he hid it well. He sat in that very chair and told me he had something to share, something he couldn't tell anyone else." He paused, choosing his words carefully. He had a recording on his phone. "He'd overheard your daughter-in-law talking to her mother in the hallway outside your son's apartment. Marcus had been visiting to drop off some paperwork, and the door was slightly open. What did he hear? Vanessa was discussing how to take control of your finances once Marcus was gone. She used those exact words, the old woman's money. She talked about how easy it would be, how you would never suspect, how Christopher would go along with whatever she decided." Thomas's jaw tightened. Marcus sat in my office and played that recording 3 times. Each time his hands shook a little more, but he never cried. He just asked me what he could do to protect you. I thought of Marcus in his final months, carrying this knowledge alone while his body failed him. He had watched Vanessa smile across holiday tables, had listened to her empty compliments and false concern, had known exactly what waited for me after he was gone. And he had said nothing. Why didn't he tell me? Because he knew you, Thomas said gently. He knew you would confront them immediately. You would demand answers, make accusations, try to fix it the way you fixed everything your whole life. And he knew that confrontation would only make things worse. Christopher would choose Vanessa. You would lose your son while he was still alive to watch it happen. He leaned forward. Marcus decided that preparation was more important than confrontation. He spent his final months building you a fortress. Thomas opened the folder and spread its contents across the desk. Trust documents, property transfers, financial restructuring, page after page of meticulous legal work, all of it signed in Marcus's weakening hand. He established a revocable living trust, Thomas explained. Every major asset you own, the brownstone, the savings accounts, the investment portfolio, all of it was transferred into the trust. You are named as the sole trustee, which means you have complete control over everything. Christopher is listed as a beneficiary, but his access is conditional. No distribution can be made without your explicit written approval. He did all this without telling me. He did it to save you. Thomas handed me a second letter, longer than the first, covered in Marcus's familiar handwriting. This is the full explanation he wanted you to have, in his own words. I unfolded the pages and began to read. Marcus's voice rose from the paper as clearly as if he were sitting beside me, his hand on my arm, his eyes holding mine the way they had for 43 years. I know you would have confronted them if I told you, he wrote. But confrontation wasn't the answer. Preparation was. By the time you read this, everything is in place. The house, the money, the life we built together, none of it can be touched without your explicit approval. They think they're stealing from a weak old woman. They don't know they're stealing from me, and I've never lost a fight I prepared for. The letter continued for 3 more pages, explaining the legal mechanisms, the conditions he had built into the trust, the specific circumstances under which the protections would activate. He had thought of everything. He had anticipated moves Vanessa hadn't yet made and built defenses against attacks that hadn't yet come. When I finished reading, my hands were shaking, but not from weakness, not from fear, from love, the kind of love that reaches beyond death and refuses to let go. Thomas waited until I looked up before speaking again. There's one more thing. During our meetings, Marcus asked me something I didn't understand at the time. He wanted to know about insurance procedures and legal liability in hit-and-run accidents. Specifically, what happens when someone leaves the scene and the victim is seriously injured? He frowned slightly. I explained the basics, but he never told me why he was asking. I assumed it was general curiosity. Now, I'm not so sure. I thought of Patricia's story. Christopher coming home at 4 a.m, white as a ghost. Vanessa suddenly in control of everything. A secret held for 6 years, like a weapon waiting to be used. Marcus had known. Somehow, he had known about that too. Thomas closed the folder and met my eyes. Your husband designed this protection to activate on evidence of elder abuse. Physical harm, financial exploitation, coercion, any of these triggers the trust's defensive provisions. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle between us. With what happened on New Year's Eve, the assault, the theft, the forced removal from your son's home, we have that evidence. The question now is simple. He leaned back in his chair, his expression patient and serious. What do you want to do? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with possibility. What did I want to do? For 72 years, I had lived by rules of fairness and patience, believing that decency would be repaid with decency, that the people I loved would love me in return. New Year's Eve had shattered those illusions. Now I sat in the lawyer's office holding weapons my dead husband had forged for me, and I had to decide whether I was willing to use them. I want to understand exactly what Marcus built, I said. Every detail, every mechanism. I need to know what I'm holding before I decide how to swing it. Thomas nodded with the approval of a teacher whose student had given the right answer. He pulled a thick document from the folder and laid it flat on the desk, turning it so I could read along as he explained. "The Marcus Chen Family Trust," he began, pointing to the header, "established 15 months ago, funded with all major assets you and Marcus accumulated during your marriage. The brownstone on Maple Street, your savings accounts, your investment portfolio, even the life insurance policy. Everything flows through this trust." I stared at the document, recognizing Marcus's signature at the bottom of each page. He had done all of this while I sat beside his hospital bed, reading novels aloud, while I held his hand through chemotherapy sessions, while I believed we had no secrets left between us. "As trustee," Thomas continued, "you have complete control over all trust assets. You decide when distributions are made, how much, and to whom. Christopher is named as a beneficiary, which means he's entitled to inherit according to the trust's terms. But here's where Marcus was particularly clever. He flipped to a page near the middle and tapped a highlighted paragraph. This is the critical clause. Read it carefully." I leaned forward and read aloud. "No distribution shall be made if the trustee determines the beneficiary is under undue influence of a third party, or if there is evidence of financial exploitation or abuse against the trustee." Marcus essentially built a kill switch, Thomas explained. "If you, as trustee, determine that Christopher is being controlled or manipulated by someone else, say a spouse with her own agenda, you can freeze all distributions indefinitely. And if there's any evidence that you've been exploited or abused, the same protection activates automatically." The implications settled over me like armor being strapped into place. Vanessa had spent years positioning herself to inherit everything Marcus and I had built. She had manipulated Christopher, stolen our money, orchestrated my removal from their home on New Year's Eve. And she had done all of it without realizing that every dollar she touched belonged not to me, but to Marcus's trust. "The account they've been stealing from," I said slowly. "That's a trust account." "Correct. When Marcus restructured your finances, he converted your joint savings into a trust-held account. The login credentials remained the same, so from Christopher and Vanessa's perspective, nothing changed. They believed they were withdrawing from a standard joint account that would pass to Christopher upon your death." Thomas's expression hardened. "In reality, every unauthorized withdrawal they've made constitutes trust fraud. That's not a civil matter, Victoria. That's a felony." I thought of the $55,000 that had vanished, the transactions traced to Christopher's IP address, Vanessa's confident denials. They believed they were stealing from a confused old woman too weak to fight back. They had no idea they were building a criminal case against themselves with every click of the mouse. "There's something else I need to understand," I said. "Patricia told me about something that happened to Christopher 6 years ago. A night he came home shaking, terrified. After that, Vanessa took control of everything. Marcus asked you about hit-and-run accidents. What do you know?" Thomas hesitated. For the first time since I had entered his office, he looked uncertain. He removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, buying time to choose his words. "Marcus suspected something happened," he finally admitted. "He never told me the specifics, but he asked me to investigate quietly. Your son covered his tracks well. No police reports, no hospital records, nothing I could find through official channels." He replaced his glasses and met my eyes. "All I know is that Christopher was involved in some kind of accident. Someone was hurt, possibly seriously, and Vanessa found out about it before anyone else did." The picture was becoming clearer now. Christopher's weakness, his submission to Vanessa's every demand, the way he flinched when she looked at him. It all made sense if she was holding something over his head, something criminal, something that could destroy his life if it ever came to light. "So what do?" I asked. "Confront them? Go to the police?" "No," Thomas's voice was firm. "Confrontation is exactly what Vanessa expects. She's prepared for anger, for accusations, for an old woman making noise that no one will take seriously. What she's not prepared for is patience. He leaned forward, his hands folded on the desk. My advice is this: don't confront them yet. Let them continue believing they've won. Every transaction Vanessa makes from this point forward is documented evidence of ongoing fraud. Every dollar she spends digs her grave a little deeper. When we move against her, we move with overwhelming force. Financial records, witness testimony, trust violations, everything laid out so clearly that no judge could ignore it. You want me to wait while they keep stealing? I want you to let them steal themselves into prison. Thomas smiled, and there was something cold in it. Something that reminded me of Marcus when he was protecting someone he loved. Your husband didn't build this trust to help you fight fair. He built it to help you win. There's a difference. I sat with that for a long moment. The anger was still there, burning low in my chest. But it was no longer the wildfire that had driven me to Christopher's door on New Year's Eve. It was something else now. Something controlled. Something dangerous. For the first time since that night, I felt something other than pain. I felt ready. How long do we wait? Thomas leaned back in his chair, his smile widening just slightly. Long enough for her to hang herself. March arrived with warmer days and frozen ground beginning to thaw. The kind of spring that reminds you winter doesn't last forever. I moved back into my brownstone without telling anyone, slipping through the front door like a ghost returning to haunt familiar rooms. The neighbors saw my car in the driveway and assumed I had been away visiting family. I didn't correct them. The less people knew about my movements, the better. Each morning, I woke before dawn and tended to Marcus's orchids, watching the pale spring light creep across the windowsill. Each evening, I sat in my study, reviewing the documents Thomas sent me, learning the architecture of the fortress my husband had built. And each day, I watched from a distance as Vanessa grew bolder, spending money she believed would soon be entirely hers. Thomas had set up alerts on all the trust accounts. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every purchase over $700 triggered a notification that landed in both our inboxes. In the first 3 weeks of March alone, I watched Vanessa withdraw $11,000 for what the memo line described as home renovations. 5 days later, another $15,000 disappeared, this time labeled investment opportunity. She was spending like someone who believed the money would never run out. Like someone who had already won a victory she was only now beginning to enjoy. Her social media told the same story. Christopher's account, which I suspected Vanessa controlled, posted photographs of a luxury spa resort in the Catskills where they had booked a weekend getaway for April. The caption read, "Finally taking the time we deserve. Sometimes you have to put yourself first." Below that, a photograph of a gleaming black sedan parked in their driveway. New year, new vibe, treating ourselves right. I stared at those posts for a long time, remembering the modest cars Marcus and I had driven for decades, the vacations we had skipped to put money into Christopher's college fund, the sacrifices we had made so our son could have opportunities we never had. Vanessa was burning through 43 years of careful saving like kindling in a fire, and she was documenting every flame for the world to see. But it was the pattern beneath the extravagance that caught my attention. Every Tuesday, without fail, exactly $4,000 was transferred from the trust account to a bank in another state. Same amount, same day, same destination. While Vanessa's other spending varied wildly. Splurges on designer clothes one week, restaurant bills the next. This transfer remained constant, mechanical, almost hidden among the noise of her indulgence. I asked Thomas to trace it. 3 days later, he called with the answer. "The account belongs to a woman named Linda Morrison," he said. "Vanessa's mother. She lives in Nevada, just outside Reno." Why would Vanessa be sending her mother $4,000 every week? I don't know yet, but I'm looking into it. Thomas paused. Whatever the reason, it's been going on for at least 10 months. The pattern started before Marcus died. I filed that information away, adding it to the growing picture of Vanessa's secrets. $4,000 a week, 52 weeks a year. That was over $200,000 annually, flowing to a woman I had met exactly once, a woman Vanessa rarely mentioned and never visited. Something was wrong there, something that went deeper than simple family obligation. In the middle of March, my phone rang with Christopher's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer. Every previous call had been about money, about obligations, about the mortgage payments I had stopped making. But something made me pick up, some instinct I couldn't name. Mom. His voice sounded different, exhausted, hollow, like a man speaking from the bottom of a well. Christopher, I just wanted to check on you, he said. I mean, really check on you. Are you okay? For a moment, I heard my real son beneath the fear and the weakness, the boy who used to bring me coffee on Sunday mornings, who called me every week during his graduate school years just to talk, who cried at his father's funeral and held my hand through the worst of my grief. That boy was still in there somewhere, buried under 6 years of secrets and the weight of whatever Vanessa held over his head. Enough. I checked up, I said carefully. Are you? He started to answer, but before he could speak, I heard Vanessa's voice cut through the background, sharp and suspicious. Who are you talking to? Christopher's breath caught. Nobody, just, it's nothing. Christopher, who is on the phone? I have to go, he said, quickly, his voice flattening back into the hollow tone I had come to expect. Take care of yourself, Mom. The line went dead. I sat holding the phone for a long time afterward, thinking about the fear I had heard in my son's voice, the way he had flinched at the sound of his wife's words. Whatever had happened 6 years ago, whatever secret Vanessa was holding, it had turned my son into a prisoner in his own home. 3 days later, Thomas called with news that made me smile for the first time in weeks. Vanessa tried to make a purchase this morning, he said. $20,000 at a jewelry store in Manhattan. The card was declined. Declined? There's still money in the account. There is, but I flagged the account for review yesterday. Standard procedure when there's suspected fraud. Now, every transaction over a certain amount requires additional authorization from the primary account holder. I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. She called the bank demanding an explanation. The representative told her the account was under review and that all major transactions would need to be approved going forward. I imagined Vanessa standing in that jewelry store, card in hand, confident smile frozen on her face as the clerk shook her head. I imagined her calling the bank, her voice rising from polite inquiry to outrage and demand. I imagined the first crack appearing in the wall of certainty she had built around herself. What happens now? Now, Thomas said we wait for her to panic. Desperate people make desperate mistakes, and I have a feeling Vanessa is about to make the biggest mistake of her life. The call from Patricia came 4 days after the card was declined. Her voice was barely above a whisper, urgent and afraid in a way I had never heard from her before. Victoria, you need to hear this right now. Don't say anything, just listen. I heard a rustling sound, then a muffled bump of something being pressed against a wall. Patricia's house was close to Christopher's building, separated by nothing but a shared courtyard and 30 feet of winter-dead grass. Through the phone, I heard shouting, loud enough to carry through walls, through windows, through all the barriers that usually keep a marriage's ugliness hidden from the world. Vanessa's voice came first, sharp and furious. Do you have any idea what you've done? The account is frozen. I tried to buy one thing, one simple thing, and they declined me like I'm some kind of criminal. Christopher's response was harder to hear, his voice lower, defensive. I didn't do anything. Maybe Mom figured it out. Maybe the bank. The bank doesn't just freeze accounts for no reason. Something crashed, a dish, a glass, something fragile meeting something hard. Someone reported us. Someone is watching. And you're just standing there like the useless coward you've always been. Sorry, story. Don't call me that. Christopher's voice rose, cracking with an emotion I hadn't heard from him in years. Don't you dare call me that. I've done everything you asked. Everything. I pushed my own mother to the ground. I let you steal from her. I've lied and cheated and destroyed my family because you told me I had no choice. You don't have a choice. Vanessa's voice dropped to something worse than shouting, a cold, controlled contempt that made my skin crawl even through the phone. You never had a choice. Not since that night. That was 6 years ago, and it will follow you for the rest of your life unless I protect you. I heard footsteps, the creak of floorboards under angry weight. Who paid off that woman? Who made sure she never went to the police? Who kept you out of prison when you deserved to rot there? The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. When Christopher spoke again, his voice had changed, desperate now, pleading. You promised you'd never use that against me again. You promised, Vanessa. After I agreed to everything, after I gave you control of the finances and stopped arguing and did whatever you wanted, you swore you'd never throw it in my face. Promises change when circumstances change. Her voice was ice. And right now, our circumstances have changed significantly. I can't do this anymore. Christopher's voice broke on the last word. I can't keep living like this. Maybe I should just tell her, tell everyone, go to the police myself. And what? Vanessa laughed and the sound was ugly, triumphant. Confess to a hit and run that left a woman bleeding in the street? Christopher, you hit someone with your car and drove away. You left a young mother lying on the pavement while you ran home and cried like a child. Do you want your mother to know that? Do you want the police to know? Because I still have the evidence. I have the repair receipts. I have the photos of the damage to your car. I have everything I need to destroy you. My hand tightened on the phone until my knuckles went white. The full picture finally came into focus, sharp and terrible. 6 years ago, my son had made a choice that shattered 2 lives, the woman he struck and his own. He had been driving after drinking at a work event, had hit a pedestrian, had panicked and fled instead of stopping to help. The next morning, paralyzed with guilt and fear, he had confessed to his wife. And Vanessa, instead of helping him face the consequences, had seen an opportunity. She paid off the victim, $90,000 according to what Thomas had traced, money that had come from accounts I never knew existed. She gathered the evidence, documented everything, and locked it away, like a weapon to be used whenever Christopher stepped out of line. From that moment on, my son had belonged to her. Every decision he made, every betrayal of his mother, every dollar he helped her steal. All of it was the price of her silence. He wasn't just weak, he was imprisoned, trapped in a cage of his own making, with a jailer who would never let him forget the bars. Now, Vanessa continued, her voice carrying clearly through Patricia's phone. You are going to call your mother. You are going to convince her to sign over the brownstone. I don't care what you have to say, what lies you have to tell, what promises you have to make. You will get that signature, Christopher, or I will end your life with one phone call to the police. I heard Christopher make a sound that might have been a sob or might have been the last gasp of a man who had finally stopped fighting. The line went quiet, except for the distant thump of a door slamming, then footsteps retreating into silence. Patricia's voice returned, shaky and close. Victoria, are you still there? I'm here. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never imagined. It's not your fault. I sat in Marcus's chair, staring at the orchids on the windowsill, processing what I had just learned. My son was guilty of a terrible crime. My daughter-in-law had used that crime to enslave him. And now, with her access to money threatened, she was tightening the chains. What are you going to do? Patricia asked. I thought about Marcus's trust, the evidence Thomas was compiling, the weapon Vanessa believed she held over Christopher's head. She thought she was the only one with leverage. She thought she was the only one who had been preparing. She was wrong. I'm going to wait for Christopher to call, I said, and when he does, I'm going to give him something his wife never has. What's that? I looked at the photograph of Marcus on the mantel, his fierce eyes, his knowing smile. He had seen this coming. He had prepared me for exactly this moment, a way out. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community, so we can bring more truthful stories for you. End P continue. A doorbell rang the next morning while I was watering Marcus's orchids. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could see Vanessa's silhouette alone, without Christopher. Her posture was different from anything I had seen before. She stood with her shoulders slightly hunched, her head bowed, the body language of someone approaching with humility rather than demands. I set down the watering can and opened the door. Vanessa's face was a masterpiece of contrition. Her eyes glistened with what might have been tears. Her smile was soft, uncertain, nothing like the sharp-edged expression she usually wore. She clutched a folder against her chest like a shield. "Victoria," her voice trembled slightly, "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but please, can we talk? Just for a few minutes?" I stepped aside and let her in. She walked past me into the living room, her eyes scanning the space as if cataloging its contents. She sat on the edge of the sofa, folder balanced on her knees, and waited for me to join her. "I owe you an apology," she began. "What happened on New Year's Eve, it was unforgivable. The stress of the holidays, the pressure Christopher and I have been under with our finances, it all just boiled over. I said things I didn't mean. Things happened that never should have happened." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue that appeared from nowhere. "I've been carrying so much guilt, Victoria. I haven't been able to sleep. I keep thinking about you alone in this house, thinking we don't care about you." I watched her performance with the detachment of a woman who had already seen the truth behind the curtain. Just hours ago, I had listened through Patricia's phone as this same woman threatened to destroy my son's life with a single phone call. Now she sat in my living room, pretending to cry. "What do you want, Vanessa?" She flinched slightly at my directness, then recovered with a sad smile. "I want us to start over. I want to be a family again. Christopher misses you so much. He talks about you all the time. We both just want things to go back to the way they were." "And the folder?" She looked down at it as if surprised to find it in her hands. "Oh, this. It's nothing really. Just some paperwork Christopher and I have been discussing. A way to simplify things for the future. Make sure everyone is protected." She opened the folder and produced a document, sliding it across the coffee table toward me. "It's called a quitclaim deed. Completely standard. It just transfers ownership of the brownstone to Christopher, so you don't have to worry about property taxes and maintenance and all those headaches anymore." I picked up the document and examined it slowly, reading every line, every clause, every piece of legal language. The deed was exactly what she described, a surrender of all my ownership rights in the property, transferring them entirely to Christopher Chen. At the bottom, spaces waited for signatures. Vanessa had even brought a notary, a nervous-looking young man who sat in a car parked at the curb, visible through the front window. "You thought of everything," I said. "I just want to make this easy for you." Vanessa's smile widened. "One signature and it's done. No lawyers, no fees, no complications. The notary is right outside. We can have this filed by this afternoon." I continued reading, asking questions in a mild, confused voice. Where exactly did I sign? What happened after the filing? How long until the transfer was complete? Vanessa answered each question with growing confidence, her earlier pretense of humility fading as she sensed victory approaching. "The county recorder processes these within a few days," she explained. "Once it's recorded, Christopher's name will be on the title. Simple as that. And the brownstone is mine to give? There's nothing that would prevent this transfer? Of course it's yours, Vanessa laughed lightly. You and Marcus bought it 43 years ago. It's your property to do with as you wish. She had no idea. All those months of accessing our accounts, all those stolen thousands, and she had never once discovered that Marcus had restructured everything. She believed she was stealing from a joint account, when she was actually committing trust fraud. She believed this brownstone was my personal property when it had been titled to the Marcus Chen Family Trust for over a year. I picked up the pen Vanessa had provided and signed my name at the bottom of the quitclaim deed. Her eyes lit up with a hunger she couldn't quite conceal. She snatched the document from my hands before the ink was dry, practically leaping from the sofa. Thank you, Victoria. You won't regret this. I'll make sure everything is filed properly. We'll talk soon about getting you some help around the house. Maybe a nice assisted living place where you can have company. And she was already moving toward the door, her words trailing behind her like an afterthought. Through the window, I watched her wave the notary over, watched them complete the remaining signatures on the hood of her car, watched Vanessa slide behind the wheel with the satisfied smile of a woman who believed she had finally won. She drove away without looking back. I returned to Marcus's orchids and resumed watering them, taking my time, letting the minutes pass. Thomas had prepared me for this moment. He had explained exactly what would happen when Vanessa tried to file that deed, exactly how the system would respond to her attempt. 3 hours later, my phone rang. Thomas's name glowed on the screen. "It's done," he said. "She filed the quitclaim at the county recorder's office about 2 hours ago. They rejected it immediately." "On what grounds?" "The property is titled to the Marcus Chen Family Trust. You, as trustee, cannot transfer trust assets through a quitclaim deed. The filing was invalid from the moment she submitted it." I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. But here's the important part. The county recorder flagged the filing as potential attempted trust fraud. They're required by law to report suspicious filings to the district attorney's office. I set down the watering can and looked at Marcus's photograph on the mantel. He was smiling as always, his eyes fierce with the knowledge of everything he had prepared. "So Vanessa just created a paper trail." "A very detailed paper trail," Thomas confirmed. "One that shows she attempted to fraudulently transfer trust property using a document she pressured the trustee to sign under false pretenses. Combined with the financial records we've been gathering, this gives the DA everything they need to open a formal investigation." "She doesn't know yet." "No, right now she's probably driving home, planning how to spend money she thinks she just secured." Thomas paused. "She has no idea that she just handed us the evidence to destroy her." I thanked him and ended the call. Outside, the spring sun was breaking through the clouds for the first time in days. I thought about Vanessa's confident smile as she drove away, her certainty that she had finally beaten the weak old woman who stood in her way. She would learn soon enough. Marcus had been right about everything, and the war he had prepared me for was about to begin in earnest. April arrived with cherry blossoms blooming, and the arrest of my daughter-in-law. The charges were read in a courtroom I did not attend: elder financial abuse, attempted trust fraud, conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The prosecutor told me the combined charges carried a potential sentence of 6 to 15 years. Vanessa stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, her carefully maintained composure finally shattered, and pleaded not guilty to everything. I learned the details of the investigation from Detective Harrison, a patient woman with kind eyes who had spent 25 years untangling the lies people tell about money. She came to my brownstone on a Wednesday afternoon, sat in Marcus's chair without being invited, and told me things I hadn't expected to hear. "We trace those weekly transfers," she said. $4,000 every Tuesday to an account in Nevada. The account belongs to Linda Morrison, Vanessa's mother. I know, My lawyer found that months ago. What you don't know is why. Detective Harrison leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. Linda has a gambling problem, severe. She's been in and out of programs for 18 years, never stuck with any of them. About 3 years ago, she got in deep with some underground lenders in Reno, the kind of people who don't file lawsuits when you miss payments. I felt something shift in my chest, a premonition of where this story was heading. How deep? Over $220,000. And 4 months before New Year's, those people stopped being patient. They made threats, specific threats. They told Linda that if she didn't start paying, they would hurt her, maybe kill her. Detective Harrison sat back, watching my face. Vanessa found out in October. She'd been sending money for years, trying to keep her mother afloat. But this was different. This was life and death. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. I thought about Vanessa's frantic spending, the way she had accelerated her theft after the holidays, the desperation I had mistaken for greed. She hadn't been building a fortune. She had been trying to save her mother's life. She made terrible choices, Detective Harrison continued, criminal choices. But she wasn't doing it for jewelry and vacations. She was doing it because she believed her mother would be killed if she didn't come up with the money. I sat with that knowledge for a long time after Detective Harrison left. The brownstone was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock Marcus had inherited from his parents. I thought about daughters and mothers, about the lengths we go to protect the people we love, about the secrets we keep and the sins we commit in the name of family. Vanessa wasn't evil in the simple way I had imagined. She was a daughter who had watched her mother spiral into addiction and debt, who had received threats she believed were real, who had made choices that destroyed lives, including her own, because she couldn't see another way. Strong. She was wrong. She was criminal, but she was also, in her own twisted way, trying to do what Marcus had done for me. Protect someone she loved at any cost. The next morning, I visited the prosecutor's office. The assistant district attorney was a young woman with sharp eyes and a folder full of evidence against my daughter-in-law. She expected me to push for maximum penalties, to demand restitution, to want blood. Strong. I'm not dropping the charges, I told her. What she did was wrong. She needs to face the consequences. Of course, Mrs. Chen, we intend to pursue this vigorously. But I'm waiving my right to personal restitution. I watched her expression shift from satisfaction to confusion. Whatever money is recovered, use it to get her mother into treatment, a real program, residential, long-term, and keep my name off it. I don't need Vanessa's gratitude, and I don't want it. The prosecutor tried to argue, but I held firm. Marcus had taught me that justice and mercy weren't opposites. You could demand accountability while still leaving room for grace. Vanessa would go to prison, but her mother might finally get the help she needed. That felt like something Marcus would have wanted. I was nearly to the door when Detective Harrison caught up with me in the hallway. Mrs. Chen, there's one more thing. Her voice was careful, measured. Your son has been cooperating with our investigation, fully cooperating. He's given us everything. Bank records, emails, testimony about how Vanessa controlled him. I stopped walking. Christopher is cooperating? More than cooperating. Detective Harrison met my eyes with something that might have been respect. He's ready to testify about everything, including what happened 6 years ago. The accident, the cover-up, all of it. Thomas called me that same afternoon, his voice carrying a weight I hadn't heard from him before. Victoria, your son just left my office. I think you need to know what happened. I sat down in Marcus's chair and listened as Thomas described the visit. Christopher had arrived unannounced, walking through the door like a man approaching his own execution. He had aged 10 years in 5 months, gaunt, exhausted, his clothes hanging loose on a frame that had once been healthy. But his eyes were different, Thomas said. Clear for the first time. The fog of fear and shame had finally lifted. "Why are you here?" Thomas had asked him. Christopher's answer came slowly, each word pulled from somewhere deep. "I need to know what my father knew about me. I need to know if he hated me when he died." Thomas paused in his telling, and I heard him take a breath. "Victoria, Marcus left something else. Something I wasn't supposed to tell you about unless Christopher came looking for it himself." My hand tightened on the phone. "What do you mean?" "A second letter. He wrote one for you and one for him. He made me promise to keep Christopher's sealed until he asked for it on his own. He said he would eventually. He said he just needed time to find his way back." I closed my eyes and saw Marcus's face. My husband, always 3 steps ahead, always preparing for futures he would never live to see. Even in death, he had been waiting for our son to come home. Thomas continued, describing opening the safe, removing the small envelope with Christopher's name written in Marcus's elegant script, describing the way Christopher's hands trembled as he broke the seal, the way his breath caught when he recognized his father's handwriting. Then Thomas read me the letter. He had made a copy with Marcus's permission written into his instructions in case Christopher ever needed to hear the words again. "My dear son," Marcus had written, "if you're reading this, it means you finally found the courage I knew you had. I know about the accident. I know about the woman you hurt. I know about the guilt you've carried and the prison Vanessa built around you with your own shame as the bars." Thomas's voice was steady, but I could hear the emotion beneath it. "I don't hate you. I never could. You are my child, the boy I held when he was afraid of thunderstorms. The young man who made me proud in 1,000 small ways before one terrible night changed everything. But I refuse to rescue you from consequences you needed to face. Some lessons cannot be taught. They can only be learned through suffering." I thought of Christopher as a child, crawling into our bed during storms, his small body pressed against mine for safety. I thought of him as a teenager, so desperate to prove himself, so afraid of disappointing us. I thought of the man he had become, trapped in a cage of his own making, too ashamed to ask for help. "The only path back to yourself runs straight through the truth," Marcus's letter continued. "Tell your mother everything. Let her decide what comes next. She is stronger than you know, and her love is deeper than your mistakes. And remember, I loved you first, and I love you last, even when you forgot how to love yourself. Your father, Marcus." Thomas told me that Christopher broke down completely when you finished reading. He wept in a way Thomas had never seen a grown man weep, great shuddering sobs that seemed to tear loose from somewhere he had kept locked for 6 years. Thomas let him cry without interruption, without offering false comfort, without trying to make it better. Some grief needs to be expressed fully before it can begin to heal. When Christopher finally looked up, his eyes red and swollen, his voice barely a whisper, he asked the only question that mattered. "How do I face her after everything?" Thomas handed him a tissue and waited until Christopher's breathing steadied. "Your mother is at home right now," he said. "She's been waiting for you to ask that question." I thanked Thomas and ended the call. Then I walked to the window where Marcus's orchids bloomed in the afternoon light. My son was coming home, not the broken puppet Vanessa had controlled, not the coward who had pushed me to the ground, but the man Marcus always believed he could become. I stood by the window and waited. I saw his car pull into the driveway from where I stood watering Marcus's orchids. The engine idled for a long time, exhaust rising in thin wisps against the cool spring air. Through the windshield, I could see Christopher's silhouette, motionless, staring at the brownstone where he had grown up. 25 minutes passed. I didn't go outside. I didn't wave or call to him. This was a journey he needed to complete on his own terms. Finally, the engine died. The car door opened. My son stepped out and stood for another moment, his eyes tracing the familiar lines of the porch, the oak tree he used to climb, the window of the bedroom where he had slept for 18 years. Then he walked toward the front door with the slow, deliberate steps of a man approaching something he had been running from his entire adult life. The knock was soft, almost hesitant. I set down the watering can, dried my hands on the dish towel Marcus had given me one Mother's Day, embroidered with small purple flowers, and opened the door. Christopher stood on the threshold, his hands shaking at his sides. He looked worse than he had at the eviction, if that was possible. Thinner, paler, bones of his face, sharp beneath skin that seemed stretched too tight. But his eyes were different. The fear was still there, but beneath it I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Clarity, resolve, the willingness to face whatever came next without flinching. For a long moment neither of us spoke. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and I saw past the gaunt stranger he had become. I saw the frightened boy who had made a terrible mistake one night 6 years ago, who had compounded that mistake with lies and cowardice, who had lost himself so completely in the prison of his own shame that he had forgotten who he was. He wasn't the weak man Vanessa had created. He was my child, broken and ashamed, finally ready to stop hiding. I stepped aside and held the door open. "Come in. Coffee's fresh." Christopher's breath caught, as if he had expected me to slam the door in his face. He crossed the threshold slowly, his eyes moving across the living room, taking in the familiar furniture, the photographs on the walls, the orchids blooming by the window. When his gaze landed on Marcus's portrait above the mantel, he stopped walking and stared at his father's face for a long time. I led him to the kitchen, to the table where he had eaten breakfast every morning of his childhood, where he had done homework and blown out birthday candles and argued with his father about curfews and college choices. I poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of him. Then I sat across from him and waited. The silence stretched between us, heady with everything that needed to be said. Christopher wrapped his hands around the coffee cup but didn't drink. His eyes stayed fixed on the table, on his own trembling fingers, on anything but my face. Then he began to talk. He told me about the night 6 years ago, the work party, the drinks he shouldn't have had, the decision to drive home anyway because he was Christopher Chen, responsible and careful, and nothing bad ever happened to people like him. He told me about the woman crossing the street, the impact he felt through the steering wheel, the terrible moment when he looked in the rearview mirror and saw her lying motionless on the pavement. He told me how he panicked, how he drove away instead of stopping, instead of calling for help, instead of doing any of the things a decent person would do. He told me about the sleepless night that followed, the horror of what he had done settling into his bones like poison. He told me about confessing to Vanessa the next morning, expecting her to help him turn himself in, expecting her to stand by him while he faced the consequences. And instead, she had seen an opportunity. Christopher described the years that followed in a flat, hollow voice, the payoff Vanessa arranged, the evidence she gathered, the slow tightening of her control over every aspect of his life. He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame her for choices that were ultimately his own. He simply told the truth, all of it, letting it pour out of him like water from a broken dam. When he finished, the kitchen was silent, except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. I sat with his words, letting them settle, feeling their weight. My son had done something terrible. He had compounded that terrible thing with cowardice and lies. He had allowed himself to be controlled, had participated in stealing from me, had pushed me to the ground on New Year's Eve. But he was also sitting across from me now, telling the truth without asking for anything in return. That counted for something. "You need to make this right," I said finally. "The woman you hit, she deserves to know you're sorry. She deserves to hear it from you directly, not through lawyers or insurance settlements. That's not my forgiveness to give." Christopher nodded slowly, tears sliding down his cheeks. "I know. I've already contacted her through my lawyer. She agreed to meet with me next week. I'm prepared to face whatever comes after that. If she wants to press charges, I won't fight it. I'm done running. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and I saw something I had feared was lost forever. The boy I raised was still in there, buried beneath years of fear and shame. He was climbing his way back to the surface, one painful truth at a time. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. His fingers were cold, trembling, but he didn't pull away. That's the first thing you've done in 6 years that sounds like my son. Christopher's face crumpled. He wept then, not the desperate sobs Thomas had described, but quieter tears of release and relief. I let him cry. Some things cannot be rushed. When the tears subsided, I stood and walked to the mantel. I lifted Marcus's photograph from its place of honor and carried it back to the table, setting it between us so he could be part of this moment he had worked so hard to make possible. Your father never gave up on you, I said. He knew about the accident. He knew about Vanessa. He prepared everything, the trust, the letters, the protections, because he believed you would find your way back eventually. I touched the edge of the frame, the familiar brass that had held Marcus's image for so many years. He just couldn't save you until you were ready to save yourself. Christopher looked at his father's face, at the knowing smile and fierce eyes I had loved for 43 years. I watched understanding dawn in his expression, watched him finally grasp what Marcus had done and why. He protected both of us, Christopher whispered, just in different ways. Yes, he did. The next morning, I woke at dawn as I always did and walked to the windowsill where Marcus's orchids waited. I filled the watering can, tested the soil with my finger, began the careful ritual I had performed every day for over a year. But this morning, I wasn't alone. Christopher stood beside me, watching my movements, learning the rhythm of care that his father had taught me without my ever realizing it. I showed him how much water to use, how to check for yellowing leaves, how to turn the pot so every bloom received equal light. He always said these orchids needed attention every single day, I said quietly, watching the water soak into the soil. I thought he meant the flowers. I looked at my son, standing in the morning light, damaged and healing, and finally fully present. Now I know he meant us, and that was my story. A story about betrayal and redemption, about secrets kept out of love and truths that set us free. Marcus knew from the beginning what I would face after he was gone, and he spent his final months building armor I didn't know I needed. He couldn't protect me with his presence, so he protected me with his preparation. And in doing so, he also saved our son from a prison of his own making. Vanessa is serving her sentence now. I don't visit her, but I made sure her mother received the help she needed. Some cycles of destruction deserve to be broken, even when the people caught in them have caused us pain. Christopher and I are rebuilding what was lost, one conversation at a time, one morning at a time, one shared moment beside the orchids his father planted. It isn't easy. Trust, once shattered, takes years to reassemble. But we're trying. That's all Marcus ever asked of us. Christopher met with the woman he hit. Her name is Sarah, and she carries scars that will never fully heal. She listened to his confession, his apology, his willingness to face whatever consequences she felt were just. She didn't forgive him, not immediately, maybe not ever, but she heard him. And in that hearing, something shifted for both of them. Christopher is working with the district attorney now, preparing to face charges for the hit and run. His lawyer says he'll likely serve time, maybe 2 years, maybe more. He's ready for that. He says prison will be easier than the cage Vanessa built for him, because at least this one has a sentence that ends. I visit him every week while we wait for the trial. We sit in my kitchen and drink coffee and talk about small things and large ones. Sometimes we talk about Marcus, about the things he taught us that we're only now beginning to understand. Sometimes we sit in silence, tending to the orchids, finding our way back to each other through the language of care Marcus left behind. The brownstone feels different now, less like a museum, more like a home again. I started changing things, small things. I moved Marcus's reading glasses to a drawer, not because I want to forget him, but because I'm learning to carry him differently. I changed the calendar to April and then to May. I opened the curtains wider to let in more light. Patricia comes by often. We drink tea and talk about Marcus and the years we shared with him. She tells me stories I never knew, moments from their friendship that reveal new facets of the man I loved. Each story is a gift, a way of keeping him alive in our memories while accepting that he's gone. On Marcus's birthday, Christopher and I planted a new orchid in the garden behind the brownstone. A purple one, Marcus's favorite color. We watered it together, our hands working in tandem, building something new from the soil of everything we'd lost. As we worked, Christopher said something that made me stop and look at him. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me quickly. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me completely. But I want you to know I'm grateful you gave me the chance to try." I thought about Marcus's letter, about the fortress he built, about the way love can reach beyond death and refuse to let go. I thought about the woman I was on New Year's Eve, bleeding and alone, and the woman I was becoming now, stronger, wiser, still learning what it means to love people who hurt you. "Your father forgave you before you even knew you needed it," I said. "I'm just following his example. It's taking me longer because I'm still learning. But I'm trying, Christopher. That's all any of us can do." That evening, as the sun set over Brooklyn, I sat in Marcus's chair and looked at his photograph. The fierce eyes, the knowing smile, the face of a man who had loved me enough to prepare for a future he wouldn't see. "I miss you," I whispered to the empty room, "but I understand now what you were trying to teach me. Love isn't just about being present. Sometimes it's about building something that lasts beyond presence. You built that for us, Marcus. You built it so well. The orchids on the windowsill bloomed bright and healthy, their petals catching the last light of day. Outside, I could hear Christopher in the garden, still working, still tending to the new plant we'd placed in his father's memory. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that we were going to be okay. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, because Marcus had given us the tools we needed. He'd given us the truth, hidden in letters and trust documents and careful preparations. He'd given us time, buying it with his foresight and planning. And most importantly, he'd given us each other, protecting the possibility of our reconciliation, even when we couldn't see it ourselves. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel, and tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. This is my truth. This is my story of how silence became strategy, how preparation became protection, and how a husband's love reached beyond the grave to save the family he'd left behind. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Thank you for listening. And if this story touched your heart, know that you're not alone in your struggles, in your pain, in your journey toward forgiveness and healing. We're all just trying to find our way back to the people we're meant to be. Sometimes we need someone to build us a bridge when we've forgotten how to cross the water ourselves. Marcus built that bridge for me, for Christopher, for all of us. And now I'm learning to build my own bridges, one carefully placed stone at a time. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for letting me share my voice with you. And remember, no matter how dark the night gets, morning always comes. Sometimes it just takes longer than we expect, but it comes. It always comes.